Good Shabbos, and happy almost Pesach. So, yesterday morning, I stood in the Beth Jacob parking lot as people were pulling up in their cars, bringing their last few slices of bread or rolls or crumbs to throw into the fire for our biur chametz. And each person came and they recited the nullification formula, either in Aramaic or in English. You can say it in English, it's perfectly acceptable. You're just supposed to be able to understand what you're saying. And Rose thoroughly enjoyed tossing pieces of lavash into the flames, aiming for the middle so she could watch them burn. And she was really sad when we ran out. There's something really cathartic about the experience of watching chametz burn. But it's also one of those aspects of Jewish ritual that feels a little bit unusual for us, at least in the way that Judaism's practiced today. There's a primal quality to it, the smoke and the ashes, and this formula we recite that I think sounds a little bit like an incantation. This is probably the closest we get to doing anything that resembles what we read about in Leviticus, maybe with the exception of Birkat Kohanim. And it's, well, that's later anyway. But so it's like this meal offering, right? Except that the meal offering was usually made from unleavened dough, and we're trying to get rid of our leavened dough. And the ritual of biur chametz really had this like dual impact on me. So I was standing there. On the one hand, I like felt this connection to our ancestors and to ancient Jewish practice. And on the other hand, it reminded me of just how distant I feel from those ancient practices, right? Of sacrifice, and just how foreign that kind of feels. And the way that our ancestors connected to God through fire, through showing up, through standing around together. It's so different for us in our kind of sanitized way of practicing Judaism. It's still beautiful, but just like more about words and more about gathering in a different way. And I also was thinking about just how far away the sacrifices are from my understanding of what God wants from us, or even who I understand God to be. And yet I'm reminded each year at Pesach of the very human need for ritual, as we like this cleansing, the scrubbing that we do, the sense that we have to do things the right way, right? And if I understand God as infinite, as the abundant flow of goodness into the universe, as transcending time and definitions, then how can I possibly believe that it matters to such an entity whether I have crumbs of chametz left in my cupboards after 10:58 a.m. on Erev Pesach? I know it's not really logical, but I somehow understand God as both transcendent and immanent, as beyond time and space, and yet still concerned about every little microbe in the universe. Every millisecond matters. God is everywhere all at once. The truth is that I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what God is or isn't. I really would never make it as a theologian. What I do spend a lot of time thinking about and worrying about is what God wants from us as human beings. I approach that question, I hope with some humility. Even saying that God wants something from us personifies God a little bit. But I found that language to be useful in trying to describe what I think it means to be in covenant, to understand myself and my people as having moral and spiritual obligations. This is what I think it means to be a people that are commanded by God. When the Torah says, as our parsha begins today, "Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, tzav et Aharon v'et banav," God spoke to Moses saying, "Command Aaron and his sons." In this case, Moses is to convey God's instructions to Aaron and his sons, but elsewhere we find similar language addressing the whole community, right? "Tzav et bnei Yisrael" is also a common line. And on the one hand, I think to myself, wow, they were so lucky. God gave them explicit instructions. God told them exactly what God wanted them to do. They didn't have to sit around every day wondering, what does God want from me? How nice that must have been, such clarity. And this, I think, is precisely what fundamentalist approaches to religion can provide, right? To do this and you'll be right with God, follow all of these laws exactly this way to the letter, and you'll know that you're doing exactly what God wants from you. The problem with that is that the world keeps changing. Humanity keeps changing. And we know from science that everything evolves. And to imagine that God somehow is the one entity in the universe that doesn't ever change doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But even if we make that supposition, the evolution of Jewish tradition and practice reflects an understanding that God's expectations of human beings can change depending on circumstances. At some point, we became a people whose primary way of connecting to God was through words, rather than through burning things on altars. And even if God is beyond time and place, geography seems to have a legitimate claim on halachic practice. Jewish law can differ for Jews living in Israel versus those of us living in the diaspora. Differences in Ashkenazi and Sephardi practices. If you live in Manhattan, you can carry wherever you want on Shabbat because the whole island has an eruv. But beyond these questions of ritual detail, there are seemingly endless ethical questions, some of which the Torah addresses head-on, but many of which are left unanswered, even by a tradition that has been producing ethical thinking and writing for thousands of years. Because even though our people have been asking themselves the same question, what does God want from us, for literally thousands of years, that question has not yet been fully answered, and may never be. The sages of the Mishnah and Talmud, the Geonim, the Rishonim, the Achronim have tried, using the 5 books of Moses as their starting point, to explain to their communities what they believed God was asking of us. And much of their thinking has been preserved for us, for a time and circumstance they could not possibly have imagined. Still, it's a gift. It's a huge gift. It's a precious gift to mine for wisdom. And indeed, there's so much wisdom to be found in all of our sacred texts. But are we really to believe that we are confined to a literal understanding or to their understanding? That part of what God wants from us is to look back at their attempts to answer the same question we're asking and to limit ourselves to their viewpoint, even though they themselves would have probably given a different answer under different circumstances. This is the tension we live with as Jews, devoted to and committed to sacred texts, to know that they are sacred, precisely because they were written to help us better understand God's will and our role in that covenantal relationship, while also knowing they're not the end of the conversation around that question. All right, I know this has been a bit of a rant. I hope I haven't lost anyone. If you've been listening to this and wondering what's going on behind all of this, I'll spill. Last week, some of you may have seen an MRA statement that both Rabbi Justin and I signed, which expresses concerns about the detainment of international students and the defunding of universities, the ways in which anti-Semitism is being weaponized to support these policies, and the threats to democracy posed by these approaches. Colleagues who didn't sign the statement shared publicly that they felt the statement misrepresented Torah, created division, and that they ultimately decided that signing such a statement was not really what they were called to do as rabbis. Rather, they see their role as rabbis as primarily about teaching Torah. I have a great deal of respect for all of my colleagues, and what I'm about to say is in no way to be misconstrued as anything but respectful disagreement. My understanding of what it means to be a rabbi definitely includes teaching Torah. I've said numerous times over the last 2 years that I believe our mission as a shul, as a community, involves living out our understanding of Torah in the world. And of course that means we have to learn Torah together and understand Torah. But for me, and I'm pretty heavily influenced here by Heschel, which is not surprising since Art Green, who started Hebrew College Rabbinical School, was Heschel's student. For me, the whole Torah is an attempt to understand what God wants from us human beings. And the answer to that question changes over time. The Torah is the beginning of that answer, not the end. The Torah helps us probe that question deeply. It provides us with some commandments, some straightforward, do this, don't do that. But even 613 commandments don't give us the whole story. They don't tell us what to do in every situation. So the Torah also gives us stories, examples of people who got it right and people who got it wrong. Heck, it even shows God getting it wrong sometimes. The Torah is the most beautiful, divine, holy, perfect starting point for the ongoing struggle of figuring out how we, imperfect, flawed, but also good-seeking, loving human beings, are meant to be in the world. I signed that statement because I don't believe God wants us to take people away from their families, detain them, and send them off to judges who will take away their rights just because we don't like some of the things they have to say. I signed that statement because hatred against my people will not be used as an excuse for hatred against other people. I signed that statement because my understanding of what God wants from me as a human being and as a rabbi is to stand up for the just treatment of other human beings. If I'm not called to do that, then I have clearly misunderstood the whole Torah, our master narrative in which we are told not to hate the Egyptians even though they persecuted us. This week I scrubbed all the corners of my cabinets and my refrigerator. I changed out my dishes, pots, pans, and utensils. I gave away our leftover flour and cereal, and I burned my remaining slices of bread in the fire at the shul. And I sold my remaining chametz, and probably most of yours, to Elaine Samuelson in front of 2 witnesses. It's really, really gone, I promise. And I hope that God is happy with that. I don't know. I did it for myself. I did it for us. I did it to remember that small acts matter, that if every crumb matters, then every human life matters. I did it so that I can sit down at a table tonight and think about the wielding of power. Where is it helpful and where is it harmful? What forces of power need to be disrupted in our time? Who are our pharaohs, and who will be Moses, who will be Aaron, who will be Miriam, who will be Shifra, who will be Puah? I seriously wish you all a Pesach of transformation this year. We need it. Our world needs it. We need to tell our story, and we don't need anyone else to tell it for us. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.